In 1808, the United States officially banned the transatlantic slave trade. This meant that no new slaves could legally be imported from Africa into the U.S. However, illegal smuggling persisted, and there was more to it. The ban only applied to the trade, not to slavery itself. Instead of abolishing the cruel system, the law still supported those who enslaved others. This allowed slave owners to exploit existing enslaved individuals in unimaginable ways, especially as they faced increasing challenges, such as high mortality rates, which affected their profits. To maintain their wealth, they resorted to horrific practices, including the establishment of breeding farms. Many are unaware of what happened within these breeding farms, which is why we're here today. Welcome to Black History Archives, where we uncover forgotten moments in Black history, events that everyone, regardless of background, should know. At this channel, we believe it's essential to understand the true history, often hidden or overshadowed by misleading narratives. Our mission is to provide you with the facts that have shaped our world. Today's video will dive into how these breeding farms came to be, the atrocities committed there, and the state's failure to intervene. As the 19th century began, opposition to the transatlantic slave trade grew, making it harder for colonial powers to bring in new slaves from abroad. Yet, within America, the cruel treatment of enslaved individuals continued. Throughout the 18th century, laws were put in place that stripped enslaved people of their humanity, treating them as mere property. Let's explore how these dehumanizing practices evolved and the devastating impact they had. In 1808, the United States took a significant step by banning the transatlantic slave trade, effectively stopping the legal importation of slaves from Africa. However, this ban didn't eradicate the brutal reality of slavery within the country. Instead, it shifted the dynamics in ways that deepened the suffering of those already enslaved. While the importation was prohibited, the institution of slavery remained intact, allowing slave owners to continue their oppressive practices unchecked. This legislative change was more about economic strategy than a genuine move towards human rights. Slave owners seized this opportunity to inflate the value of existing slaves, treating human lives as mere commodities essential for maintaining their profits. Despite the decline in the transatlantic slave trade, the demand for slave labor persisted fiercely in America. Valuable crops like sugarcane, cotton, and rice in the southern and western regions thrived on the back of enslaved labor, making slavery a highly profitable enterprise. Even as voices for abolition grew louder, many clung to the belief that the economic benefits of slave labor, especially in the lucrative cotton industry, were indispensable. This mindset fueled tensions between the northern and southern states, setting the stage for future conflicts. After the 1808 prohibition, slave owners turned their focus to what they euphemistically called natural increase. This grim practice disproportionately affected black women, who were coerced into bearing multiple children to increase the slave population. Enslaved women were forced into pregnancies and births with little regard for their health or autonomy, turning their fertility into a valuable asset for their owners. The mortality rates among slaves were alarmingly high, prompting plantation owners to adopt inhumane methods to sustain their workforce. Black women, some as young as 13, were compelled to have numerous children. By the age of 20, these women were expected to have borne 5 or more children, under threat of severe punishment. Their bodies and lives were exploited to the fullest, reducing them to tools for maintaining and expanding the slave economy. Enslaved women were subjected to unimaginable hardships, forced into roles that stripped them of their humanity. They were treated not only as laborers but also as breeding vessels to increase the number of slaves. Slave owners, along with their families and associates, took turns exploiting these women to propagate their holdings. Promises of freedom were dangled before them if they produced a certain number of children, adding another layer of coercion and despair. Imagine being just 13 years old, already burdened with the expectation of bearing children for your masters. By the time these young women reached 20, they had endured multiple pregnancies, their bodies and spirits pushed to the brink. This system of forced breeding left them vulnerable and subjected to relentless suffering. Tragically, the slave market in 19th century America showed no hesitation in selling pregnant women, further commodifying their lives and perpetuating their torment. At Black History Archives, we strive to shed light on these dark chapters of history that are often overlooked. Understanding these painful truths is essential for recognizing the resilience and strength of the Black community. Join us as we uncover and honor the stories that shaped our past and continue to influence our present. This was a cycle of despair for enslaved women, subjected to violence, forced pregnancies, and childbirths without care or time to recover. These women were trapped in an unrelenting loop of exploitation, with no escape from the brutality imposed upon them. Slave owners and masters acted without moral restraint, fathering children while disregarding the rights and humanity of their victims. Words often fall short in capturing the horror of systematically forcing women to bear children, an act that can only be described as cruel and devastatingly abusive. If you're finding this video insightful, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that uncover the forgotten chapters of Black history and culture. Let's continue. The breeding farms were not only literal breeding grounds but also symbols of grave injustice. White slave owners operated with impunity, protected by a system that afforded them legal cover while offering no rights or protections to their Black victims. Shockingly, even some of the nation's highest leaders were involved. Thomas Jefferson, the President of the United States himself, was a slave owner, further entrenching the oppressive structures that allowed such atrocities to continue. Smithsonian Magazine recently published a compelling article that sheds light on a lesser-known side of Thomas Jefferson's legacy. Historian David Bryan Davis delves into the complex and often contradictory nature of Jefferson's views on slavery. While Jefferson initially advocated for concrete measures to limit and eventually eradicate slavery, there was a notable shift in his position during the 1790s. His earlier calls for emancipation faded into silence, leaving historians puzzled as to what caused this change. During the American Revolution, slavery presented an unspoken moral dilemma for many, including Jefferson. It allowed individuals like him to remain morally conflicted without fully confronting the cruelty of the institution. For example, it's said that an anti-slavery passage was removed from the Declaration of Independence, though it remains unclear whether Jefferson himself wrote it or if this story is meant to portray him in a more favorable light. To fully grasp the complexity of Jefferson's relationship with slavery, we must look at his home, Monticello. Through careful examination, we see how he rationalized the institution of slavery, trying to align it with the nation's evolving identity and ambitions. However, Jefferson was not alone in his actions. In 1819, the United States passed an act allowing its ships to patrol not only its own shores but also the coast of Africa, intercepting slave ships before they could reach American soil. However, the true motivation behind the 1819 measure wasn't a moral push to end slavery. Instead, it was designed to protect the interests of American slave owners. The strategy aimed to sustain a population of around 4 million enslaved individuals within the country, securing the labor force without relying on external sources. Both Southern and Northern lawmakers collaborated to pass these laws, which, on the surface, banned the international slave trade while conveniently avoiding the larger issue of slavery within the United States. Tragically, sexual exploitation was rampant, and violating the personal lives of enslaved people was normalized, further stripping them of their humanity. The cruel breeding practices mirrored those used in animal husbandry, where forced marriages and mating were commonly imposed on enslaved individuals. They were treated as property, and their lives were controlled in ways that echoed the treatment of livestock. Male slaves, often referred to as stockmen, were deliberately selected to impregnate female slaves owned by various individuals, all in a calculated effort to increase the number of laborers suited for grueling work in the fields. A shocking study conducted by economist Richard Stooge in 1860 revealed a striking ratio of nearly 2 female slaves for every male in Virginia. This disproportionate gender balance, with hundreds of thousands more women than men, highlighted the existence of a lucrative domestic breeding industry. Slavery in America was deeply rooted in racist ideology, with slave owners believing it was their right to maintain absolute control over those they enslaved. Tragically, house slaves, especially women, lived under the constant threat of abuse, including sexual exploitation by their masters. In many cases, enslaved women who bore children from these assaults had to hide the true parentage of their offspring, often pretending that the children were fathered by their master's wife to avoid harsh consequences. All of these horrifying practices were driven by one sinister motive: profit. Slave traders openly discussed the profitability of breeding farms, proudly boasting about the thousands of enslaved children they could sell each year. Even figures like Thomas Jefferson recognized the financial gains from the birth of enslaved children. By the mid-1800s, the profitability of the slave trade had reached staggering levels, with estimates valuing it at around $4 billion, far surpassing other economic sectors. This dehumanizing system reduced people to mere property, and it created a chilling financial structure. Southern states capitalized on the enslaved population by using them as collateral for loans from banks. These mortgage slaves were bundled into bonds and sold globally, allowing individuals from regions where slavery had been abolished to continue profiting from this abhorrent system. The legacy of the slave trade serves as a stark reminder of how economic interests, exploitation, and systemic racism intertwined to cause unimaginable suffering. The legal and financial systems that sustained this inhumane practice are part of America's darkest history. Numerous reports have shown that slavery was a driving force behind the American economy. Yes, slavery played a pivotal role in shaping America, and it's crucial for people to know this. Did you know these harsh facts about slave breeding? It's undeniable that the state played a role in enabling slave owners to establish breeding farms and expand their enslaved workforce. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Would you like to see more videos on these important topics? If so, don't forget to subscribe to click the bell icon to stay updated. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for our next video.